All right, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our webinar. Today we'll be talking a bit about unleashing the power of ServiceNow for governance and risk management. So your presenters today are myself, James Herbert. There we go. So myself, James Herbert, I'm a solutions engineer here at OneLogin. And then we also have TJ Greisick, Chief Product Officer of Clear Skye. So quick agenda here, we'll start by doing a brief introduction of each of our organizations. We'll talk about some of the challenges that we're seeing, in the enterprise today, and we'll, speak to some of the solutions that, our joint offering with Clear Skye and OneLogin, can help with some of those challenges. And then TJ is going to take us through a demo of the product as well, and then we'll do some time at the end for questions and answers. So to kick things off, who we are from the OneLogin side, we started off back in 2010 as an identity as a service vendor, so focusing on things such as single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and role-based access control. We've been a long-time partner of ServiceNow and kind of helping organizations move throughout their digital transformation. And we have a global footprint, so over 2,000 customers around the world, with some of the notable ones up there as well. And I'll let TJ speak to Clear Skye.
Absolutely. Clear Skye is a silver technology partner of ServiceNow, focusing in security apps, with our first app being identity lifecycle management. We came in second place in the CreatorCon Challenge for the ServiceNow Knowledge Conference and are funded by ServiceNow. We founded the company in 2015 by security professionals looking to automate a lot of the day-to-day operations around identity management. And our app is available in the App Store today. So looking forward to this webinar working with OneLogin.
Great. Thanks, TJ. So to go ahead and jump right in, we talk about some of the challenges that organizations face today. And more we're seeing that, organizations today are borderless, right? This concept of a borderless enterprise. So, the idea behind that is, as organizations move more and more workloads into the cloud with systems such as ServiceNow and other SaaS applications, the process for managing who has access and who should or should not have access, and access reviews and onboarding and offboarding, all of these things become extremely difficult as organizations adopt more of these cloud technologies. And we also see more and more often these days where it's not just the internal employees anymore, but there's also external users, partners, customers, vendors that sometimes need access to corporate managed applications as well. And so all of these things kind of create complexity and create challenges, and just kind of make it really difficult to to manage all of these different things. And so an interesting stat that was recently published by Gartner on this is that they predict that by 2020, a typical small enterprise's identity and access management program will span over 1 million people, 10 million things, and billions of relationships. All right. So again, it's a complex thing that organizations need to tackle, and as you are managing access of, again, employees and external users, partners, vendors, etc., it just becomes this daunting task. And so some of the biggest challenges for, IT organizations are, some of the big ones there. You see things like process inefficiencies, risk, provisioning, right? So user onboarding, offboarding, user lifecycle management, and things of that nature. These are some of the things that we're seeing IT organizations, face. And again, these challenges become increasingly complex as organizations move, more and more workloads to the cloud. And so, kind of looking at it from a broader perspective, and some of kind of the key areas that we'll kind of speak to today are some of these ones, right? Especially around access control and user on and offboarding, right? If we kind of had to narrow it down to a couple, those are some of the biggest ones. And those are some of the biggest ones where the joint solution between OneLogin and Clear Skye will help the most. And so we just kind of see these as some of the biggest challenges for an IT organization. So especially things around access control, user on and offboarding, and things of that nature. So that brings us to, how does OneLogin fit into that whole picture? And so, again, OneLogin first and foremost is an identity as a service platform. So that means we're kind of, tackling the core functions of things like single sign-on, via open standards like SAML and OpenID Connect, helping with, securing access with things like multi-factor authentication, and then having the ability to do, contextual or adaptive security policies as well. And then we also provide kind of extended identity features, so things surrounding, LDAP and Radius for connecting to appliances and networks, things of that nature. And then, we have kind of robust and deep integrations with several other different components of, an organization's environment, so things like, Active Directory and LDAP integrations, SIM integrations, and things of that nature as well. And in terms of kind of what this looks like from a high-level architecture perspective, basically OneLogin is kind of the hub, right? So we kind of sit centrally in your environment and, connect to your existing, access control services, things like Active Directory and LDAP. We can connect to, HR directories, so things like Workday and UltiPro and things of that nature. And so basically, we're obtaining information about the users from those directory sources and utilizing that information to determine, things such as which applications that they should have access to, using our role-based access control engine. But then, first and foremost, we are acting as the identity provider. So OneLogin is facilitating the access into these applications, right? And those could be either public cloud applications, so things like ServiceNow and other SaaS applications that you're familiar with, or they could also be, on-prem or privately hosted applications as well. Right, so OneLogin is kind of acting as the gateway, if you will, or the front door to provide access into all of these various different types of applications. All right, now let TJ take these things.
And that seems like a lot. There's a lot of different applications. There's a lot of different employees, different profiles of who these employees are and what type of access they should have. And that's just the beginning. With compliance being the way it is today, with the high amount of controls that need to be attested to with, ISO 27001, GDPR, PCI, HIPAA, depending on what type of organization you are, the level of compliance that is required continues to become greater and greater. The level of effort to manage that access and to ensure that the people who have the access are the ones that need to have that access or should continue to have that access through the life of their employment. In most of today's organizations, this is still a very manual process. Here we're looking at a diagram where really we're only looking at 5 different data sources of access. We're looking at financial data or admin systems, but as you just mentioned, we're looking now at hundreds of applications and hundreds of different systems sprawled across the cloud and on-premise, and thousands of entitlements that roll up to that, to tens of thousands of employees that you now have to manage this access to, understanding the risk of who has this access. And in today's system, a lot of that is done manually. We talk to customers constantly who are exporting this data into spreadsheets, and then compliance teams are correlating all that data and determining who needs to review that access. And they send it around in spreadsheets, and the employees or the managers will review that access, update the spreadsheet and send that information back. And talking to different customers, it's about 200 hours every quarter just for the compliance team to manage all of this. It's a huge effort every single quarter, 4 times a year, that you're going through these systems and you're validating who has access, you're reporting on who has access, and then you're building the evidence to respond back to your auditors. And even with just these few connections that we're talking about, and this is a very, very small example, looking at this is very, very confusing. And the effort of ensuring that everything is done correctly and that once those audits are completed, that it's all sent back to the correct system owners and that they remove the access and it's validated that it's removed, is just a mountainous task that is something that can be very easily automated through OneLogin and ServiceNow and Clear Skye working together to be able to automatically pull this evidence directly into our tools and automatically be able to route all of the reviews in the correct direction and perform these actions automatically while providing all the audit evidence around the downstream. So with Clear Skye, we can set up contextual reviews. We can define the scopes of our reviews and reach out to those systems or reach out to OneLogin, who will then be the broker to that information. We can go ahead and route based on the context of the different approvers or based on the reviewers themselves. So for example, we know who owns the access and we can route to system owners or compliance people in a single location or to the managers who are responsible for those individuals, who may actually know what their employees are working on day to day, understanding whether they still need access that may have been granted a long time ago. And then even further, taking that data and feeding it into ServiceNow's GRC and correlating that information back to the authority documents like we talked about earlier, like PCI or HIPAA or GDPR. And understanding, in a moment's notice at any point, exactly where you stand in compliance, whether you're non-compliant in certain areas, and being able to address those issues before, that risk is exposed and before it becomes a bigger problem for your organization. So before we get into, the relationship between OneLogin and Clear Skye, it's important that we talk a little bit about ServiceNow. ServiceNow is a system of action for the enterprise. It's a platform where you can develop enterprise-class applications, just like Clear Skye, alongside many of the other organizational processes that are running in your company. Things like IT. A lot of companies use ServiceNow to manage tickets. People use ServiceNow as a single portal to request access, request knowledge, request help. IT operations, to actually manage the infrastructure within your organization and understand the risk of different areas that you need to manage. And then looking at the security space, security operations ServiceNow also supports, which is security incident response. When a security incident happens, you want to know right away what is the impact of a security incident. And if there's any accounts associated with that or any access associated with that security incident, we can, integrate easily to security operations and be able to take action on that. Let's say, for example, there is a rogue account, performing activities that it shouldn't be. Right there in the security incident response form, we can go ahead and disable access in those other systems. And then looking at governance, risk, and compliance, which we're going to focus on today during the demo. Being able to correlate the evidence and the activities that are being performed across your enterprise and being able to provide automated data collection that feeds in and correlates directly to your authority documents and gives you a perfect update and status of where you sit in the enterprise. And then a bunch of other applications like customer service, HR, understanding when employees are coming online and what access they need and when they're leaving, and integrating with other types of processes you may have built on top of the ServiceNow platform. So even beyond the suite of applications that ServiceNow provides, you'll benefit from the architecture of ServiceNow. You'll benefit from their graphical workflow engine. So we'll talk a little bit about it as it relates to onboarding, but not every company is identical, and not every onboarding process is identical. Clear Skye will manage the account creation and the baseline access and granting all of those activities. But there may be other activities that also need to be performed within your organization. Let's say, set up an office, provide a key card, make sure that their desktop has been imaged and all the activities are provided. And then the analytics around all of this. Because ServiceNow is one platform, it gives us the capabilities to look over the silos within an organization. We can look at single dashboards, which we will in a second, that show you, what type of operations are coming in, what type of risks we have, and you can really paint the perfect picture for whether it's your executives who want to see, a risk high-level 10,000-foot view, or whether it's the workers who are actually executing the tasks and performing the activities and working. All of this can be seen on this single platform. So sort of moving into how all of this works together with Clear Skye and OneLogin. So Clear Skye provides several different modules within our application that will allow you to manage those thousands of applications and resources that are provided on a day-to-day basis in a modern enterprise. We provide things like a user front end where users can go to, or managers can go to onboard employees, make sure that they have all the access and the activities they need when they first start. Employees, once they've been, onboarded, they can then go to that same portal and request access to things like applications or file shares or data repositories. So that way you can enforce the least privilege to ensure that only the people who need the access retrieve that access, including, outlined approval chains, things that, you can start off at very basic approvals. Like, for example, if someone needs, let's say, an application like Office, then they would just need their manager's approval for that. But let's say they need access to client data. Maybe you want to have their manager approve that access first, and then start to transition into higher levels of approval. For example, having a client manager approve the access because they're familiar with who's working on that client data. And then, through the life of that employment, also ensuring that people are reviewing access, that it's not fire and forget, that we're not just, accumulating access that then becomes a risk later on down the line. As you finish projects, you may no longer need certain pieces of software. Once you finish working with specific clients, you may no longer need access to their specific data. So putting a life cycle around the access that's been granted beyond just the baseline granting of that access. So we have a very flexible review engine that is going to allow you to configure the scope of reviews, configure, exactly what you want to review, who's going to review it, and we're going to go through a few use cases of that. But being able to ensure that on a regular basis that you're reviewing and that the people who have been granted access in the past, have the access that they need, and that if they don't, that it's removed right away. And then other processes like onboarding is very important. Transfers is another one that's often forgotten. So when someone changes jobs, do they still need the access that they have? You always hear the story that someone goes from the mailroom to the boardroom. They have made it through the ranks of an enterprise, but throughout that time, nobody ever talks about the access that they were granted in the mailroom, and then in the IT department, and then in the other, 5 other departments that they were in till they got to the boardroom, and nobody ever takes that access back a lot of the time. So we also have processes in place that when someone changes jobs, it'll trigger a review, or it'll automatically disable access to certain resources based on how you've configured. And then lastly, the offboarding process, ensuring that, when someone leaves an organization, that they don't have access to things beyond their employment. Even beyond, the one that they log into to check their email. But in IT, a lot of the times, we have access to service accounts, vendor accounts, 15 other accounts that may be related to a system that are often forgotten about throughout the life of your employment, especially if you've been there through leadership changes and process changes. A lot of that can be lost in the shuffle. I'm sure everyone on this call has been there at a time where you're reviewing accounts and you have that conversation of, I don't know whose account this is. What does it do? I don't know, but I don't want to touch it because we can't have an outage on Friday. So, managing those different activities and ensuring that those types of things are, taken care of and cleaned up, and then monitored and having the ability to audit each step of the way, understanding when it was disabled, why it was disabled, understanding who disabled it, all of these different attributes, which are going to be really important for, compliance. To be able to say, yes, we are performing reviews on a regular basis, and this is exactly the review we performed. And being able to say, once we completed that review, here were the actions from that review, and here is the evidence that this completed and it was successful, and then being able to automatically map that back to those authority documents to ensure that you're compliant 100% of the time. And then partnering with partners like OneLogin, who have access to tens of thousands of different applications in the cloud and on-premise, where customers are already using that as their front door to give their employees and their customers access to those applications. We can now leverage those relationships and those connections to even be able to manage everything, or all the things that OneLogin is managing also.
Yeah, that's great, TJ. And also one thing to quickly add there, beyond, from the Clear Skye end of things, being able to kind of automate the process of, granting access and doing the reviews and attestations and onboarding and offboarding, things of that nature. From there, once access has been granted, OneLogin is going to be using, secure methods for authentication, like SAML and OpenID Connect and things of that nature, and then also having the ability to apply, flexible and contextual security policies on top of that as well. Things like, multi-factor authentication, utilizing machine learning to determine risk level and things of that nature also. So, the two solutions combined together can really give you a, kind of a great overall package for, making sure that only the right people have access, and then once they do have access, making sure that you're using secure methods to actually allow them into a particular application.
So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into a demo. Perfect. So where we're going to start off is the employee experience. What you see here is a standard out-of-box portal for ServiceNow. So when you implement ServiceNow, you're provided with an interface that your end users, your employees can interact with. This is where many of your employees go to order new hardware, new desktops, new software. It's where they go to look up how to use applications or knowledge around your organization. Or if they have trouble, they go here to request help. It's really the portal where they interact with the services within your organization, the administrative departments, and it makes it very easy for them to track requests and understand the progress of things. And with Clear Skye's ILM, they can also request access from this same portal. Just like we see the order something knowledge base and get help, we can also go to request access right there on the home page. So it's something your customer or your employees are going to be very familiar with. From the request access, if we go ahead and click into there, we provide several out-of-box forms that make it easy for customers and employees to get the access that they're looking for. Managers can request new employees, which will start the process of onboarding. And this also isn't the only way that we can bring in new employees. ServiceNow supports many different integrations, which means that if you already have an existing HR system like Workday or SAP, we can go ahead and pull those feeds directly in and kick off the process that way also. We can request new accounts. So, sometimes your standard account isn't the only account you need. Oftentimes you would need training accounts or service accounts, or let's say that Microsoft's coming to take a look at your servers, you'll need to provision a new vendor account. And by going through a single form, a single request, it allows us to enforce those compliance policies. It allows us to ensure that when someone requests a vendor account, that the sourcing department, for example, can approve that vendor account. Because if they haven't gone through the process of sourcing, then we don't want them to create an account for them yet, because otherwise we're out of compliance. Maybe legal documents haven't been signed yet. Maybe the protections aren't in place to allow this vendor into our environment. You can request service accounts for a new server you're bringing online. And in that case, maybe we want the IT engineering group to approve that so they can keep an eye on all of these service accounts. And maybe there's already an account that exists. Maybe they just need to say, well, why don't you use this account? So really allowing the subject matter experts to be the gatekeepers of the access, and then allowing the automation to take over and provide the access without having to bring in the infrastructure team to do these simple day-to-day tasks. Maybe someone has started, they've been onboarded as an employee and they need access. They got their baseline access and now they need maybe Adobe Pro, which is a $1,000 license cost. So for applications like Adobe Pro, you can start off with a manager approval. You can then go into so you can start off with a manager approval, and then for more expensive, you can escalate up to a budgetary team who keeps an eye on these things to ensure that there aren't runaway costs with some of the entitlements that you may provide to people. And then additional resources like transfer and offboarding to really round out the different requests that you can make. And the great thing about this is completely extendable. So if you have a specific app you want to throw on or a specific process that you want to put into this catalog for your infrastructure team, or when someone submits a change, so the limit or the possibilities are limitless. Let's go ahead and dive into a new employee form. So I'm going to go ahead and bring a new employee online. We have some of the basic details here. Employee start date can be today. Let's go ahead and just fill out the details. So In this case, Robert West is going to go ahead and join our team. We'll go ahead and put him in the information technology team, and then we'll go ahead and give him an IT analyst role. Specify a location, and specify a manager. And we're also not limited by what you see here. So these are the out-of-box fields, but we also realize that every organization is different. We can specify a policy, a role-based access policy as an IT analyst, what baseline access he should be provided to perform his role within the organization on day one. As an IT analyst, he's going to need RSA tokens and laptops and smartphones. And maybe we want to, give him an Apple computer, so we can even add comments in. Or, like I said, you can add a field that selects from the different options that your organization may have during onboarding. So, I love Apple. And then we can go ahead and submit that request. So from this portal, the user can track the progress of the request as things continue to progress through. We can see that TJ added the additional comment, I love Apple. If the person setting up the new employee needed to communicate with the manager who had just submitted this, they can do it through this nice interface and ensure that everything is set up the day before the employee joins the organization, so it's seamless for that end user. From the ServiceNow portal, we can track the operations. And so right now we're looking at an overall status, and we're going to go over to the operations tab. You can see all of the different operations as they occur, and these charts that you're looking at are interactive. So if I were to click on and wanted to see, all of the add members that had occurred on 8/28, I can do that. It'll also let you know if any, anomalies have happened. Maybe there was a lot of requests that shouldn't have gone through. You can see that here. But for this demo, we're just going to take a look at the new employees. So here we have Robert West, and we can see that it's in the pending approval stage. So right now it's waiting for Joe Romano's approval. Once we open the record, you can see the process bar up at the top. So right now we're in the pending approval. You can see any details related to the onboarding of this employee. And the great thing is we can actually look at the active workflow for this employee onboarding. So right now we're in the approval stage. The next stage after it's been approved by the hiring manager is to move into creating the account, providing the baseline access, and then also providing any other assets that are required based on your organizational needs. This is really the power of ServiceNow in that you can modify and manipulate your workflows in a visual way to ensure that the process and policy changes and updates as your organization matures and updates. So you're not forced into a single way of managing onboarding. If you needed to create file shares, you can execute, automation scripts. You can, really have a whole toolbox of activities that you can use within here. You can send tasks to your different departments, really to have a complete set of activities for onboarding. And as each of these activities get completed, let's go ahead and approve this. The first thing that'll happen is the account will be created. So right now, because this request was approved, it's going out to our Active Directory Lab environment. It's provisioning that standard account for our new employee, Robert West. And as soon as the new account is created, it's then going to start provisioning the access to this account. Takes a few seconds, but much faster than a regular IT person, I promise you. So here you can see that the account has already been provisioned in our Active Directory Lab. You can see that based on his IT analyst role, that we've now started to add his membership to these different entitlements. This can act as audit evidence. We're already starting to see the relationships of the activities that we're doing. It's no longer that someone goes into a server, they make a change, they create something. There's no room for mistake because we're putting it in the specific place every single time. And then exactly who requested it, who approved it, what was granted is all provided in this nice little package if you ever had to go back and understand how do we get to the point we're at today. And once we refresh, we can see that all of these activities have been completed. And then we can move over to the tasks. So even beyond the access, we can actually monitor the tasks that are also being generated. Setting up an office, RSA token, provisioning smartphone, and provisioning laptop. And we can monitor the status of each one of these until the process is come to a complete end. Beyond just tracking and auditing, we can tie service level agreements to these. So if you say that onboarding should only take 5 days, we can actually monitor against our progress for these processes. So there's a lot of other areas where we can monitor our SLAs and other activities as we go through this. Let's go back. So now that we have started, we have our new employee, there may be the necessity to request additional access. So I've started at a company and I am put on a project and I need to start working in Amazon Web Services. So what I need to do is I can go to the portal, I can go ahead and request access and go to the access request in my access catalog. So once we're here, ServiceNow and Clear Skye already know who this person is because they're logged into ServiceNow. We already know where the environments are. We already know who the approvals for all of this are. There's no running around and trying to figure all of that out. To the end user, all they need to do is specify their application. And we're just showing application for this demo, but this could be resources, it could be data, it could be really any logical access that we need to grant to this individual. So here I'll go ahead and specify I want access to our Amazon Web Services. And just before we go ahead and submit that, what I'll do is I'll show you here in my OneLogin plugin, I don't have that app in my, I don't have the access to that app yet. I can even go to OneLogin's portal and look at the different apps I do have. So here I have Chase, Chrome River, and HipChat, but I don't have Amazon, and I know I need that one. So just going back to our access request, I'll go ahead and submit. And the user can track the request from the portal here. As you can see, the different requests, the application, and who's requesting the access. And then from the operations portal, I can go ahead and track that progress. Now, I'm showing you guys from the operations portal. In theory, the approvals would be sent out through email or through a push notification to the owner's phone. So you can respond while you're on the go, and the details of the email will provide all the details that you need to know. You'll need to know who's requesting it, who they are, what department are they in, what title do they have, and what is the reason for requesting this access. So let's go ahead and open up our operation record. And here you'll see that TJ is requesting this access. He's requesting access to this entitlement for his account, which is tj@clearskyeinc.com. And then at this point, we can go ahead and approve it. So once it's been approved, you'll see that it's automatically gone into the completed stage. And if we were to go back to our OneLogin plugin, I now have access to my Amazon Web Services. So now we can go ahead and click on it. It'll bring us into Amazon Web Services, and we can perform the job and responsibilities that we need to do. But maybe I'm just using this temporarily. Maybe I'm working on one project. And a lot of the times we will grant access without taking it back. And so it's important that we review that access on a regular basis. So to do this, we can also go back to our portal and we can configure a review to review the different access that has been provisioned. You can track upcoming reviews, like we have a Q3 production review that got kicked off on Monday. We can track any one of our scheduled reviews, or we can start a new one. We can review accounts, which is great for reviewing vendor accounts or service accounts. We can review access. That's great for reviewing applications or entitlements that someone may have access to. And for this example, I'm just going to go ahead and open up our highly confidential system. And so in this case, here's a review configuration. We've given it a title and description, and then we start to define the scope of our review. So this is where you would usually go out to the subject matter experts. You would say, okay, I need a data dump of all this information. This is the scope of what I'm looking for. And they would get back to you in 3 to 4 days with that list of applications. From here, we can specify exactly what the scope of accounts we care about. So maybe we just care about vendor accounts, or we want to care about all accounts in OneLogin. We can specify the access filter. So any of the attributes of your entitlements or access can be used to scope out your reviews. In this case, we have a field called data classification. And I want to see who has access to highly confidential data. We can define reviewers. In the case of reviewers, we can assign it to a single person. We can assign it to a group like your compliance department, and they can work on the review together. Or we can assign it contextually, which is really powerful. Because in larger organizations, the compliance team may not, there's a lot of time spent figuring out whose accounts are whose and who should be reviewing that, and then splitting it up and sending it out to those individuals, and then getting that information back. So in this case, I can actually send it out to the account owner and say, hey, do you still need this access? And they can respond back about their own access. I can send it out to the account owner's manager. I can say, hey, do your direct reports need this access? And then they'll receive an email which they can click into, answer a few questions, and then that access will be revoked, which we'll get into in just a second. So in this case, I'm just going to send it to TJ because I'm the only one here for the demo. We can also set up schedules. So we can do on-demand, which we're going to do today because that's going to allow me to just start the review. We can also do things like specific date or repeat interval. So if I know on Monday I need to kick off a review, I can schedule it for 8 a.m. on Monday, and chances are half the review will be done by the time I get into the office. We can set up a repeat interval for those quarterly reviews or the yearly reviews that you just want to set up and forget. Once you've defined the scope, you can then just set up a review, and you don't have to even think about kicking it off anymore. The reviews will go out to the different responsible parties. They can answer the questions. That will all feed back into the database, and you can monitor it from a single dashboard. And then we have advanced settings. You can set up post-review workflows. So let's say that you don't only want to just say whether someone should have it or not. Maybe you want to initiate a compliance review of the event once it's done. Maybe you want to send a task to HR to start offboarding people. Maybe you want to do training around some of this stuff or really evaluate it. The sky's the limit. Just like we looked at with onboarding, the same workflow engine can be used for post-review workflows, which will allow you to execute scripts, send tasks, perform any type of activity you can think of. And so let's go ahead and start our review. Just letting me know that it's going to start and send out some notifications. And so what it'll generate is a review event. In the case of this one, we're just sending one review out to myself with a very small scope. But we can also review larger sizes, and this will let you keep track of, you may send out 500 reviews to different individuals, and this will give you a single place where you can go to track the progress of the review, understand, what actions are being taken. So for example, if I go to detailed view, I can actually monitor, the different details. When people are completing them, what actions are being taken, who maintained access versus who removed access. And I can also track any notes that may have been provided. So instead of having to open up each review, I can look from a single place and understand exactly, why Jane in Wisconsin had an issue with her review or didn't, understand something, and I can do direct follow-up from this. So once this has been started, an email will go out to the recipient of the review, or the user can come in through their ServiceNow portal. So here we can see that we have access reviews, which wasn't here before. And if I click in, you can see that I have one access review of highly confidential systems. So if I click into the highly confidential systems, we get a nice interface which will show you all the accounts that have access to highly confidential systems. I can provide notes here. That can then go back up to the compliance team who is managing the higher level of the review. They can follow up and help you finish it. Or they could reassign it to someone who would be better at, performing this review. I can look at different attributes of these employees, and these reviews are customizable. So we're looking at department and title now, but we could just as easily put other attributes about this employee in here. What their employee class is, are they a temp, are they a vendor, those types of activities, to really be able to make an educated decision of whether this person should have this access. We can click into Nancy, who just so happens to be a software developer, and it'll tell me what access she has. It looks like in this case, Nancy has access to Amazon Web Services. If I don't want Nancy to have access, we can just click that disable button, which will update our status. We can go back to the review, and we can see that we're 100% done with reviewing Nancy. Now, depending on your reports or the size of the review, it may not make sense to look at it from this view. So you can also switch to just look at the perspective of the access. So here, I'm really only reviewing two applications. We're looking at Amazon Web Services and our Box application. So here I can now click in and see, okay, well, instead of going for every single account, I can say, here are all the people with access to Amazon Web Services. And it also doesn't make sense that maybe, Alan has access to Amazon Web Services. So we can go ahead and remove him, and we'll also remove TJ. Actually, maybe we'll keep Nancy. It seems like a software developer should have that access. We can go back, and now we just need to review the access for box. So from here, I can say, yes, I want to maintain the box access. That's fine for now. Once the user has completed their review, they can go ahead and mark it as complete, and they're done for now. The review is they no longer have an access or review up top, and they're going to get a notification that that's completed. Now, as all this is happening, the compliance team can even monitor this from a dashboard, which gives them real-time stats of exactly what's going on. So if we go to the review events here, and I want to view the highly confidential, which I've done a few of these, this is the one, you can see here that one review was kicked off, 6 objects were reviewed, 4 were maintained, and 2 access was removed. You can see breakdowns of the departments that have access to highly confidential access. You can see, product development had 3, leadership had 1, and human resources had 1. We can track titles, so chief product officer, QA, etc. And this gives you an idea if there's any anomalies. Even though we're having other people do these reviews, there may be risk presented here that you still want to address. For example, the wrong person having access to certain systems within your organization. Or access by location. Maybe you have a call center that shouldn't have access to things. And you see that someone in a call center has access to highly confidential. Now that could have happened during a transfer, that could have happened in a number of different ways where it fell through the cracks, and now we have a mechanism to review it, ensure that it's cleaned up before that risk is taken advantage of. And each one of these charts is also, we can click into. They're all interactive. So if I wanted to see everyone in London within this review, I can see here that these 3 accounts from our London office have access to highly confidential. We can export this information. We can see who took action on it. And all those details could be provided for auditing purposes and being able to respond back to auditors. But there's more. So with the power of ServiceNow's GRC, or governance, risk, and compliance, we can automatically collect all these activities that we've been performing, all of these approvals, access to different systems, the reviews of different objects, can all be correlated and reported on from the compliance and policy engine of ServiceNow's GRC. We can map this information back to, there we go. We can map this information back to your actual authority documents and understand exactly when you're non-compliant. So for example, all the data, all the activities that we've been completing are now able to tell you, well, we may not be compliant in one of our authority documents like ISO 27002 or PCI or GDPR or some of the NIST frameworks. And then we can actually understand what was the policy that had failed based on the evidence collection that we're providing. And if we want to remediate that, we can just go up to the overall status where we have one non-compliant control. We can click into that control that's non-compliant and open up the control. And once we open this up, we'll notice that we have an issue. So this is all the details of that control. We can understand the category, the type, the classification, all of the different authority documents that are referenced against this control. And we can look at the indicators, or we can set up indicators that will validate the data that we've been collecting. We can set up queries and things like that within an indicator that says vendors should never have access to highly confidential data, and if they do, we're non-compliant. And those different activities can be collected automatically with the evidence that we're pulling and the evidence that we're providing through these activities. If we find an issue, it can be assigned automatically to our compliance department, who can then follow up and address those issues, whether that means sending out a review to the right person and removing that access, whether it means just removing the access automatically without a review. And once they decide that it's no longer an issue, we can go ahead and close complete this, and this will bring us back into compliance. And here we can see up at the top, we're now in compliance status. And from our Clear Skye dashboard, we can even see that we're now 100% compliant in all of our authority documents. So there's a huge amount of value in working together with OneLogin, who is connecting to all of these different applications, who is providing a sort of a gateway, a hub. We're connecting to their hub of applications and being able to tie compliance into those different access points. Working with ServiceNow's GRC to then take the evidence from our access collection, from our reviews, from our request system and approvals, and tying all that together and mapping the results of these activities back to compliance frameworks. And to think that a lot of companies today are still doing all of this manually. It's not that because you don't have our tool, it can't be done. It's just that someone's doing it. It's usually a person or a team of people who is either, whether it's, on the OneLogin side, going out to each one of these individual systems and setting up access, whether it's on the compliance side, going to each and every one of these single systems and pulling evidence and doing the project management around it and routing to all these people and getting all that back and then having to complete all that work and just hoping that nobody makes any mistakes along the way. It's all sort of tied together and wrapped in a nice bow that you can look at from a 10,000-foot view all the way down to the activities that are being done. I think we'll open it up for some questions.
Great, yeah, thanks for that awesome demo, TJ. And so we can certainly field any questions as they come in, and to kind of highlight some of the key takeaways here, right? Basically, it's helping to automate a lot of the manual processes around identity lifecycle management that we see in the enterprise today. Right? So using the joint solution between OneLogin and Clear Skye can really kind of enhance that overall, identity lifecycle management, tasks that need to be done on a regular basis. So, a couple questions as they're coming in here. Let's see, somebody has asked, does or how does Clear Skye integrate with SecOps, security operations within ServiceNow? TJ, you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the great thing about being on the ServiceNow platform is it's very easy to interact with other modules within the ServiceNow ecosystem. We have customers who have integrated with SecOps by during the security incident response process, there's an evidence collection section. It's when you start to understand that there was a security incident and you're pulling together the affected users, employees, or accounts of that security incident. And once we determine that an account is impacted by a security incident, we can actually perform actions directly on that account from the security incident form. It'll send an operation record over to identity management. It'll determine which environment we need to address that concern in, and it can send disablement or removing of access to applications like OneLogin to shut that down right away while we're still in the process of handling it. So something that was traditionally done manually and where in security incidents is most important to address those as quickly as you can, having these pieces working together can definitely address that.
Awesome. Great. So let's see, another question we have here. So what kind of access controls do you have around ServiceNow? So on the OneLogin side, that's basically OneLogin acting as the identity provider, right? So first and foremost, using SAML authentication to actually authenticate users into ServiceNow. But then we can also layer additional security controls on top of that as well, such as we have the ability to use either static multi-factor policies or adaptive multi-factor policies as well. And especially the adaptive multi-factor policies tend to be a very powerful one where it basically will analyze a login event and feed information into our risk engine and apply machine learning and user behavioral analysis to determine things like whether or not that's a risky event, right? Is it normal behavior for the user, or is there an anomaly occurring, and should there be some additional level of security that's enforced, like a second factor? So that's kind of some of the primary ways that we control access to ServiceNow, and then of course we can do that for thousands of other applications as well. And then so it looks like we have one more question here also. Any other ways, kind of a general question for TJ, any other ways that the integration can tie into ServiceNow? So we have kind of, we talked about the GRC story, the SecOps story. Anything else that you want to add there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the possibilities are endless, and it really depends on the use case. We've seen, not only on the SecOps and the GRC, ServiceNow also has an HR module that manages a lot of the tasks around HR and case management, the benefits setup and some of those things. And we can plug into HR from an onboarding and offboarding perspective. Your HR department is managing the employee and the legality of an employee. But once they start the process of offboarding an employee or onboarding an employee, we can actually create the accounts or disable the access and ensure that the IT pieces are happening in line with HR. From change management, we could grant people access in a temporary basis. So when you're submitting a change and there's certain configuration items or servers that you need access to, we can, process the access side of it. So ensure that the access is granted right at the beginning of the change window, and then ensure that the access is taken away at the end of the change window. And any other of those IT processes, CIs, for example, ServiceNow has a configuration database of all your computers and servers and discovery of what it's picked up. And you can tie access requests to that type of thing also, where your engineering team could be looking at a configuration item and say, I need access to the server, and they can just right-click the top and say request access, and it would already know who they are, what account they're going to use. It would know who to submit to, who needs to approve based on who owns the server, and a lot of activities like that.
Great, thanks. A couple more questions coming in here. So one is, where has this solution been deployed? So without revealing too much information, and don't want to get into any legal trouble with revealing names or anything like that, but we have a number of joint customers that utilize both solutions. I would say a better way of answering that is, an organization that would be an ideal customer for this joint solution is, an organization that has challenges around identity lifecycle management and or access in general, right? Organizations that need to meet specific compliance requirements like some of the ones that TJ mentioned, so HIPAA, PCI, GDPR and NIST frameworks, those types of organizations that, so especially publicly traded organizations would fall into that category. So, any organizations that kind of have the challenges where, they have to manage, thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of users and their access to different various systems, and need to enforce, different access control policies as well. Any organization that kind of fits that need would be a good ideal candidate, I would say. Another question here, can the MFA component work with Google Authenticator? Yes, absolutely. So OneLogin has the ability to integrate with several types of authentication factors, Google Authenticator as well as Microsoft Authenticator being two of those. OneLogin does also have our own authenticator product called OneLogin Protect, which is available on iOS and Android app stores. And then we can also integrate with other things such as Duo Security, YubiKey, RSA Secure ID. It's kind of all of your main factors that you've seen elsewhere. Is this solution built completely on the platform, and does the client need other components to make it work? So I'll let TJ take that one.
No, it absolutely is. So from the ServiceNow perspective, we are built natively to ServiceNow. We do use the orchestration component for some of our automation, so that would be necessary, but it's still built on top of ServiceNow. Now, while integrating with OneLogin, OneLogin has its own identity platform, which we integrate through, but doesn't require any third-party components from the Clear Skye side. So it's a direct communication between the ServiceNow platform and the OneLogin identity platform.
Great. All right. So looks like there are no more questions. So I'll just take a moment to thank everyone for joining. We appreciate your attendance. Feel free to grab some of the collateral that we've attached here on the broadcast. There's several different PDFs and data sheets and things of that nature, and links to websites. So feel free to consume some of those resources. We'll also be sending out a recorded version of the webinar, so you'll have that for your reference as well. Looks like there's, okay. Great. Well, so yeah, again, thanks everybody for your attendance. We appreciate it, and we'll be sending out some of this information after the webinar as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and close it out. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.